Before the break, we discussed main branch of MealPreference Angular. In this branch of the code, we learned about template-based forms. Why it is called template-based forms? Because a lot of form logic is inside of template. As opposite to reactive forms, in reactive forms, it's not in template, doesn't contain as much logic as script. In reactive forms, a lot of logic is inside of TypeScript, not inside of template. At least more logic than here. Also, in template-based forms, we bind inputs to variables that we declare ourselves. So it is direct to directional binding to inputs. When we change input, change variable, it will change variable. When we change variable, it will change input. In reactive forms, there is also two-directional data binding, but not to our own variables, but to variables inside of the class declared in the library. So we cannot bind it directly to our own variables, which is different. So, and it requires different imports. So let's switch main branch to branch called reactive forms. Reactive form, check out. So in the module, you see it is import, it is reactive forms module. There is no dependency on forms module. So it is, everything is in one, reactive forms module. Let's go to input, input component CS. As before, I injected MealPreference service to share data between pages. But you see public variable now, it is not my own type where I store data. It is forms. Form. I use it to, again, to show two-directional data binding. I have that output at the bottom to demonstrate it is data bound. But now it is these pieces data bound, not my class. So inside of constructor, I initialize this variable. So I say this form, new form group. And now, this part, it is in name of the input. So if we go to input components HTML, we'll see this. This is a name and input, and it's called form control name. Previously, it was called name. Now it is form control name. It is different. Okay. It is this one. So name of the input, then new form control, initial value, in this case it's empty, and optional validators. In this case, I say required, and this is pattern. Please notice it is shorter. This pattern didn't work in previous variant, so I had to use that one. This is kind of search pattern, right? Look globally for any character which is visible. G stands for global, slashes, it means look for, and slash capital visible character. This didn't work in template-based form, so I had to do other things. You can look up, there is also validator minimal number. So for number, you can use min and make minimal is 1 cent, which will work, right? Because for bill, probably minimal input that makes sense, it is 0.01, right? So this is how you can do validation. Look up how to deal with it, so it will be probably min parameters and put 0.01 and it's done. And also required and that. Okay. And experiment with it. If it doesn't work, look up, Google it. It shouldn't be difficult, right? So this is with validation. Now, next, meal choice, initialize it to fish, not spicy, initialize it to false. Okay. So this is how this form is initialized. On submit, I copy data from the form. You see, form value username, I also trim it, and I call it as a parameter of the constructor. So I created this object, user preference, and I gave it to submit it to my service. So it is shared between input and output. Okay? And I navigate as before using TypeScript. So this is the logic inside of TypeScript. Let's look inside at the logic inside of template. Okay. The same. ng form form tag has event handler ng submit on submit. Right? And this is different. This part is different. As you see. So we are declared variable form, and this form is name of the variable inside of my template. So this part is this one. Okay. So there is a direct link from template back to the class. This one, form group. See? Next, how do I display error message? I have access to this form, so I can retrieve input, so I don't have to link to this directly, by name of the input, and check if it is valid or invalid, and check if it is touched or untouched. So this message will be shown if this input is invalid and touched. Okay. Why do we have question mark? Because potentially it could be undefined, because get can return undefined. So why it can return undefined? Because I can mistype this thing. Right? So if you remove question mark, you see what happens. Okay. So error will make it red, and it will appear message when it will show a message when it is invalid and touched. Okay. Also, please notice that for radio buttons, instead of name, it is form control name. So there is no names, it's always form control name right now. Okay. The rest is the same value of meal choice. There is no explicit data binding instruction here, because I referred to this by form control name. Okay. So in template, it is shorter because there is no explicit mentioning to directional data binding. All right. And button becomes disabled when form is invalid. Okay. And this is how this is for demo to show that it is data bound in two directions. Please notice it is data bound to form object, not to my own class. Right? And also, please see that I use equivalent annotation equivalent to dot, because in JavaScript, square bracket and check mark can be replaced with dot if it is a valid name, which is this is valid name. Doesn't have spaces, minuses inside of it. Okay. But let's try to replace it. I replace it with dot, and now it is in red. But it still works. So it is not an issue with the code. It is IDE does not understand it. This is why it's in red. It will work just fine. But I decided to avoid this in red, so to avoid extra questions from students. Okay, why it is in red? IDE does not understand it. And in order to hide that it is in red, I use it equivalent for JavaScript. So this is necessary if you have some bad name in it, like minus sign inside of the name. This will still work for objects. But if name is good, you can replace it with dot and it should work. And it is work. It works. If you run it, it will work. IDE does not understand it, but Angular understands it. Okay. So I will put it back. And again, it is just to avoid extra questions from students, like why it is in red, because Even if I explain it in class, it will be some students who didn't listen. They will ask questions why it's in red. Okay. Right? So this is explanation. In components, in app module, this is a reactive forms module. This is required. Questions? And on submit, since data is in form right now, data bound, I will need to copy it from the form to my own object and submit to my service because it is sharing my object, not form object. All right. Output is the same. I didn't touch it. Questions?